what do you think there needs to be to solve those problems?
That's a difficult question to answer. I don't know the answer, but we have to face that. We have to realize that that's an issue. We have to face the truth in terms of understanding just how much of a demographic problem we have when we're talking about who is actually the Israeli high-tech and who works there. And we have to understand that these things are not something that's going to come out of itself. It's not just going to happen. We have to be active about it. We have to start programs that would try to, bring in Israeli Arabs, bring in Israeli Orthodox Jews, bring in more females. That's also an issue into the Israeli high-tech. And that's just one issue. There's other issues with regard to neglect of higher education budgets. Higher education budgets have been going down in Israel for decades now, and it still hasn't affected the high-tech industry. But if anyone thinks that it's not going to affect the high-tech industry in the long run, he's probably wrong, because that's the basic infrastructure of any industry that involves innovation. And if you don't have enough academics that are doing brilliant research, you're not going to have enough high-tech people and business people that are doing brilliant innovation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another problem. If I should mention, just a few more problems that have to do with Israeli startup scene. So there's been a lot of talk about Israel not having big companies. That's not really an issue for me. I don't see why Israel really should have these big mammoth companies like Nokia or like Samsung. I don't know where the advantage is in terms of the Israeli economy. I think we're much better at becoming something like a world lab where companies are being sold and functioning as research and development centers for other companies, global companies. But, and here's the problem, up until now we were attracting big companies that usually were in either telecommunications or chip industry, and I don't think the Israeli market up until now has been very successful in attracting too many companies from Asia, too many companies from Europe, too many companies from Russia, and it's all been coming from the States. And looking at the long run, Asia is going to become so much more important, and Israel has to strengthen its relationship with Asian markets and to bring in so much many more international companies coming from there, because that's where the money is going on the long run.
So I would like to ask you history in a nutshell of HaAretz, how it became to be really giving the agenda.
So HaAretz started out as a family publication. It was created by the Shoken family in the early 30s. I think it was the early 30s. Mm-hmm. And, throughout Israel's history, it's been an opinionated, highbrow newspaper. It's just one of the oldest one in Israel. And it was always sincere about its opinions, even if sometimes they're not very popular, and they're not very popular today in the Israeli culture. Saying things as they are might hurt people. People don't really like to see headlines that are negative, but when the situation is negative, you can't do anything about it. You can just, go on and say happy things about reality shows that are currently on television and get a lot of rating, but then again you have to look at the south of Tel Aviv, and you're seeing political refugees, and you're looking at what's happening in the West Bank, and you're looking at racism internally in Israel, the state of education, even looking at welfare, looking at prices of commodities and how hard it is to earn a living in current Israel. And there must be at least one newspaper that would bring these things to the eyes of the public. Mm-hmm. And I hope that HaAretz and the Marker are doing that. that sort of things.
So can you tell us about the readership?
So basically, I would say that HaAretz readership is mostly made of probably more left-wing readers, people that probably have higher education, somewhat higher salaries. Once again, it's similar demographics to the ones that are served by the New York Times and the Guardian.
As a high-tech reporter, and as you publish articles, are there any criteria or rules you keep as you publish them, as you write?
So because Israel creates, the Israeli market creates so many tech stories, and we have just a few journalists covering the entire tech section, the entire tech business in Israel. We have to filter out very strongly which stories are we going to deal with and which stories are just going to be left out. And we're trying to signal out the stories that are actually going to make an influence, the stories that we can use them as an example to something that goes on in the market, the stories that we can bring out and say, look, there's a problem here and somebody should fix it. And we might name names and say, you're the Minister of Communications, you should do something about it. Or you're in charge of the IT systems in the Israeli government, you should do something about how bad Israeli government internet services are. Actually, they're not very bad, but some of them are still working only on Explorer. That's another issue. And bringing out issues that are not dealt with enough in other places. It might be blogs that don't have the capacity of doing the research needed, and they'll focus more on the latest LG model, which is of course brilliant. But I would say that for us as a newspaper, it's less important which model of LG would be the best for you, and more important how to incorporate more sections in the Israeli public into the high-tech industry, and bringing their salaries up and creating higher income of the entire country.
Do they try to really fix the problem, or?
So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it's a very long struggle, and it's not a very comfortable struggle because it might have economic effects on the newspaper as a whole, and sometimes we're able to create the change and other newspapers would come along and say and join the agenda that was put on in HaAretz or in the marker. But it's not all happy endings, and it's a day-to-day struggle, and it's quite hard.
And now I want to ask you about the names. Could you tell me the meaning of HaAretz and also the marker?
So HaAretz basically is the country. It's like it's the state of Israel, only without naming Israel. It just and the marker it's in English. It's just marking out the issues that are most important and highlighting them.
And is there any thing you would like to tell a Korean audience?
So until Eva came to meet me, I didn't know that there was a startup scene in Korea. I always heard about big Korean companies, and I've been talking to Israeli managers that were either flying to Korea or coming back from Korea and telling me Samsung said this and LG said that. And it was refreshing to hear that there's also a startup scene. And I think, because we're talking about basically two not very big countries that have such a strong tech section within their economies, I think Israel and Korea can strengthen this relationship and benefit from it, looking at other places like Silicon Valley and trying to join forces and create something more powerful.
Wow, great. So by HaAretz, maybe we can have like holistic view what needs to be done in Israel and for the future. So thank you so much for the interview. So hope to see you next time. Bye bye.
Thank you.